Hey guys, it's Z. Coming back at you with another 20 cards for Commander. I recommend picking up at under $10. In this case, we're hitting the green cards. So, if you've seen the series so far, we've been kind of working our way through Wooburg order. White, blue, black, red, green. I do also want to hit colorless or artifact, and I want to hit multicolored. So, those will potentially be coming up, and hopefully y'all are enjoying this so far. Again, this is just something I kind of wanted to hit on, partially for like y'all's knowledge, but I also know like Zed is not 100% familiar with a lot of these cards, so I wanted to kind of compile a list together to kind of help out people I play around with, and I figured while I was doing that, I could go ahead and make a video and get it out for y'all, so that way I'm not just helping my community, I'm helping out other people who are looking for cards that are fairly affordable they might be wanting to add to their collection. So, yeah, it's not the most, involved thing in the world, but it's not meant to be. It was meant to be a resource for a friend, or for a few friends of mine, and I figured I'd share it out with the community. That way we can crowdsource it and see if there's anything I'm missing that y'all think we need to be including. So, but the whole little disclaimer out of the way, let's start rolling into the list with card number 1, Verdant Force. So, Verdant Force is going to be an 8 mana cost, 7/7 elemental. At the beginning of each upkeep, put a 1/1 green sapling onto the battlefield. So, notably, it's each upkeep, not your upkeep. So, the return cycle with a 4-man pod, which is what I assume is a base for most people, you're going to get 4 saplings. With these saplings, they can play defense and protect you. They can attack out. If you're in a token deck or a sapling deck, there are some synergies there. So, it's just something to keep in mind. And, 35 cents at the time of recording, it's fairly affordable. All these are going to be from the time of recording, so I'm not anticipating any massive spikes of cards or anything along those lines. This is just simply at the time of recording, this is what I show prices are. So, that way if something happens, these prices do go up, we're kind of future-proofed a little bit. Well, we can always come back and readdress and add stuff later. So, the next card we're looking at is Wild Growth. It's a 1 mana cost, enchantment aura, enchant land. Wild Growth adds 1 green to your mana pool for each, basically every time you tap the mana, it adds a green in addition to its mana. So, you throw it on the land, turn 1, and you're going to get extra value out of that land for the rest of the game, as long as nobody blows up the land or blows up the enchantment. So, the next card I'm looking at or recommending here is called Primordial Sage. It's a 6 mana 4/5 spirit. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. So, the nice thing about it is it doesn't even have to resolve. You can just go to cast, 1 mana cost guy, draw a card, keep cards in your hand, keep going. If you can cast a bunch of spells in one turn, it's great. If you can't, it's still fine. You'll be able to get other cards. So, the next one we're looking at is going to be Cultivate. So, green is the color of mana ramp. In this case, it's got a fair chunk of mana ramp in different versions. So, Cultivate's the first one that we're really going to dive into a little bit deeply, but there's not too much to talk about. It's 3 mana cost sorcery. Search your library for 2 basic lands. 1 goes into your hand, 1 goes onto the battlefield. So, that said, there's another card later on in the list that I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to talk about now if I have it. Yeah, I've got it. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it now. It's the same card effectively. It's just an arcane in addition, and that's going to be Kodama's Reach. So the only difference for Kodama's Reach is that it's also a sorcery arcane type. So I figured rather than spending a bunch of time talking about the 2 cards separately, working from lowest price to highest price, I just kind of bundled the 2 cards because they're effectively the same thing. And a little bit later, we'll see that with another card as well. But after that, we've got Corrosion Grip. So I like Corrosion Grip as a removal spell because of the split-second ability on it. So, Corrosion Grip, 3 mana, destroy target instant, or destroy target artifact or enchantment, split second. As long as this spell is on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. So once that spell goes on the stack, they're not going to be counterspelling. They're not going to be activating an ability to try to make something unblockable unless it's a mana ability. So things like that, or untargetable unless it's a mana ability. So with that being said, it's something that will help us get rid of pesky problems, and especially if it's the blue player's problem, because they can't interact, they can't say no. One of the few times you can have them, not say no. So the next card we're going to be looking at here is Wood Elves. When it comes into play, search your library for a forest, put it into play, shuffle your library. It doesn't say a basic forest. So that could be a shock land, that could be battle land, tango land, whatever they're calling them nowadays. Basically, anything that has the forest subtype. So it'll allow you to go find. That being said, that makes it a lot more versatile than just go find a basic, because yeah, you could go find a basic, or you could go find a forest that has one of the other basic subtypes, and you're effectively just going and finding a mountain that way if you go find a stomping ground. So just something to keep in mind. The next card we're going to talk about is one of the tried and true classic, in my mind, OG ramp spells in the form of Rampant Growth. So in this case, 2 mana, search your library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tap, shuffle your library. 2 mana, go find a land, put it in play, save it for next turn. Fairly simple, but fairly important to do, because land is how we play this game. The next card I'm going to talk about is more of a finisher. I know we don't have a lot of finishers across the videos we've done so far, but this one kind of strikes out to me, because it's had a couple of reprints lately. So I think this is the way Wizards is kind of saying, hey, we really kind of want to print these effects this way, kind of make them affordable and keep it moving along. That's End-Raze Forerunners. It's 8 mana, 7/7, with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. When it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Trample until the end of turn. So, not only are you going to give all your other creatures Trample, so they're going to smash over things, they're going to get Vigilance so they can block on defense. They're going to get +2/+2. So if you have 12 creatures, that's +24/+24. Not to mention, this creature itself also has haste, so it can join in on the fun immediately. So, while it's not a Craterhoof Behemoth, it's definitely a budget board. And I think, realistically, us having some kind of budget option to finish out the combat game like that is very important, especially in this format where board states can get very clogged down and combat can get very minimized in terms of gameplay. So, just something I think we should be keeping in mind and looking into. Next card we're going to have is just another ramp spell in the form of Sakura Tribe Elder. Snake Shaman for 2 mana. It's a 1/1. Sacrifice it, search your library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tap, shuffle your library. It's a creature Rampant Growth that can sacrifice itself to go do it. So, it's pretty good. Generally, I'm an advocate for 2 mana cost ramp. 3 mana cost needs to get me ramp plus something. But I can definitely get behind a Sakura Tribe Elder. The next one we're looking at, speaking of 2 mana cost ramp, is going to be Farseek. So for 1 and a green, sorcery, search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So much like Wood Elves we've discussed before, this does not need to be basic. And part of the reason it's in our green list is because it can go find non-basics that have these types. Notably, it cannot find a forest. So you're not going to go find your basic land this way. I would not include this card in mono green. But I built this list in mind with 20 generic cards that are good that can go in decks of those colors. That doesn't mean solely of those colors. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you just tried to slap together these cards and go, hey, I'm throwing all 20 of these into a mono green deck I picked up online, and we're going to roll, this is not going to be the card for that. This is a wrong card for that. So just keep that in mind. The next one we're kind of looking at here is one of our card draw spells. And this one's been getting reprinted a couple times recently as well. So, and it's a good thing. It really is. And that's Return of the Wild Speaker. Instant cost 4 and a green. And you get to choose one. So you can draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. So if you're not running a bunch of humans, this is going to draw you some decent amount of cards. Or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So it's another overrun type effect that doesn't affect your humans. So if you picked up the white-green precon, this is probably the wrong card draw spell for you. But otherwise, it's a pretty decent one in a green deck. Speaking of card draw, our next option here is going to be Beast Whisperer. 2 and 2 green, Elf Druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. It's on a 2/3 body. So, again, it's notably that cast phrase, so it doesn't have to enter the battlefield. It's just whenever you attempt to cast. In something like Elf decks, where you're casting 5 or 6 elves a turn, you're drawing 5 or 6 cards and keeping your hand filled. This card can be pretty good. But even if it's just, I'm going to cast a 3 mana cost creature, I'm going to replace itself in its hand. So, it doesn't necessarily have to go all out or, hit you 12 cards for 1. You're still replacing the card every time, so it's still pretty good. The next card we're looking at is a card that recently got reprinted. I could see it trickling up in price, though, so it's just something to keep in mind and be careful about. We're looking at Azuri's Predation. It's an 8 mana cost sorcery. For each creature your opponents control, put a 4/4 green beast token onto the battlefield. Each of those beasts fight a different one of those creatures. Basically, this is a green version of a board. It's going to have creatures enter the battlefield and fight, dealing 4 points of damage to each creature on the field of an opponent. If creature's lower than that, they're going to die. Otherwise, they're probably going to stick around, and they're probably going to eat your beast, but at that point, you're still dealing with a fair number of creatures. I know with the Twin Casters precon for Quandrix that came out, that card gets insane. When you can double up the number of tokens that come into play off the Predation. So, it's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, that's one of those cards. Right now, it's fairly affordable at about $4. I can see the price on this one ticking up. So, it might just be worth considering picking up while it is still within that affordable range. So, that said, the next card I've got is an oldie but goodie, Eternal Witness. So, Eternal Witness, when it enters the battlefield, you can return a card from the graveyard to your hand. Hey, there's a card that somehow got sent to the graveyard, I didn't want to be there, or I need to get it back. Pay 3 mana, play this Witness. It's a 2/1 body that'll get you your card back. Not a lot to ask for there, but at the same time, it does the job. Next card we're looking at is going to be Rishkar's Expertise. Again, another card draw spell. So the way this card is going to work, it's 6 mana, sorcery. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you got a 7 power creature, draw 7. It's got another thing, though, that makes it pretty sweet. And that's going to be, you may cast a card with a converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Basically, it's a 6 mana spell that gives you a 5 mana spell for free. The only thing is, it also draws you some cards. I don't see that as much of a downside. I think that's pretty good. So, excuse me. So, our next category is going to be another group of cards we're going to bundle together here just to make it a little bit easier. And that's going to be Nature's Lore and 3 Visits. Because these cards are very, very functionally the same. 1 and a green, sorcery speed. Search your library for a forest card and put that card into play. Shuffle your library afterwards. So, like we've already discussed here with the Wood Elves, Farseek, these are going to search for the land type forest. It could be a dual land, it could be just a basic forest if you want it to be. It also doesn't put it in play tapped, it just puts it into play. So, that said, it is a very solid form of mana ramp that's going to get you a little bit of extra advantage there. And overall, at the end of the day, getting that kind of ramp advantage is going to be very helpful. So, if you've played Arena, you've probably heard about this little menace or this little bug. But at this point, I think this is still one of those cards I would recommend picking up, especially for you paper players, like myself. And that's going to be Scoot Swarm. So, Scooty Boy is interesting. Me and him have a love-hate. Mostly because this card is one of those cards that gets me, either I either win the game or I'm hated off the table within the next turn. So that's kind of my relationship with Scooty Boy here. But for 2 and a green, he's a 1/1 insect with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get a 1/1 green insect. However, if you control 6 or more lands, instead of making the insect, you just get a copy of Scoot Swarm. So Scooty Boy gets out of control really quickly, especially when you play him like on turn 5. Then you go to play your 6th land, and you'll control 6 lands in play, so you get another Scooty Boy, and it just gets excessive really, really quickly. So, yeah, it's one of those cards I recommend having, but I recommend paying attention to it as well and just making sure you have a good way to represent that or a good way that you can kind of keep track of that yourself. Because if you do have all that, it's not a bad card. It's just, I know in my experience, it's put a lot of a target on my head because that card gets out of control pretty quickly. And the last card on our list here, at the time of recording on the website I'm using, it's showing to be at $9.99, so we're within budget. Good old Avenger of Zendikar. We talked about Scooty Boy getting out of control with his landfall shenanigans, but I think Avenger is a little bit better. 7 mana, 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 plant creature token onto the battlefield for every land you control, for each land you control. So you got 12 lands, you put 12 of them boys into play. Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield, you can put a 1/1 counter on each plant you control. So these plants get bigger as the game goes on and keeps dragging on. So just because he starts off small, starts off unassuming, these plants can be pretty good. And even if you don't get the 1/1 counters on it, they're skull clamp fodder, they're blockers, they're sacrifice things that you can use to get into other resources. So they're all pretty good. And like I said, with that, I wound up having to cut cards out of green just because by the time I started this green list, I started with green. That was the original one I was going to start with. And I had like 50 cards I had to just cut. And I kind of want to just focus in on a couple of core principles. In case you couldn't tell, there was a lot of ramp, a lot of removal, and then a lot of bombs really when it came down to it. But I did want to kind of give a little bit of everything, so there was some removal there, and some other things like that. There was a wrath in there, things like that. So outside of that, that's been our green 20 cards I would recommend for under $10. Again, I had to cut this list short because of all the cards I had in green. So if there are things you think we need to be made aware of and you want us to let us know, hit us up in the comment section below. We'd love to have that conversation with y'all. Otherwise, though, depending on how this goes, I've got 2 more we're going to be doing in this initial run. Outside of that, though, if people want it, we could probably do a Series 2 where we cover other cards in these categories. But I wanted to at least hit 20 for each color and archetype or whatever. So that way I made sure that we gave a pretty diverse selection, and we kind of went from there. But anyway, this has been Z. Take care, stay safe, and y'all have a good one. Peace.